I just want you guys to know this Amplify is going to become our next step in reaching a world and reaching people who are lost, who are far from Christ, who are spiritually disconnected. And I want you to be a part of it. I want you to join us as we do this journey. I've spent time. Second, I'm trying to get my remote here set up for me. I should have done this ahead of time. But I spent time this week praying and just asking for God to use this time that we have together, asking God just to move in great ways so that we can see a kingdom changed. I was sharing with the live audience before you guys hopped on about the events that happened at high school, and there were students that were arrested. And I actually knew one of the students, and it weighs heavy on my heart. But you know what it comes down to is this, is what we do as a church matters. What we do as a body of believers matters. And I don't really care what non-Christian people think of me or think of my reputation or think what I stand for. I'm more concerned with what God wants me to stand for. But I ask God to go before me, to open up people's hearts and ears and eyes to what we're doing. And that's where we come from. And I just want to, and I've shown this video before. It is by far Jack's favorite video. But I want to share this with you, and I want to talk to you about it. But several years ago, I did a sermon series, a mini-series, actually 2 sermons long, called Gumption. And gumption is the character to commit and complete. And so we got this great video that I'm going to pop up there for you. I just want you guys to watch this with me. The message is simple, and it applies to so many areas of life, is everyone gets excited. We're like, man, I'm going to go out, I'm going to take this hill, I'm going to storm it. And so we all have the gumption to start. But starting is only half the battle. In fact, it's not even half the battle. We are called the finish. And it tells us in the Bible that Jesus Christ is the author and perfecter, the author and the finisher of our faith. And what he's saying there is he has spoken into existence. He's spoken us into it. He's began something in us. And he who has began a good work in us will bring it out to completion. And so we realize in Amplify that it's not just about starting something. It's about finishing. Any underdog movie you watch, they start off strong and like, oh, this is great, life is great. And then adversity happens and people want to quit. They want to throw in the towel. They're like, oh, it is tougher than I thought it was. And then at some point, because it becomes an underdog story, the team who's the underdog, the ones who are wanting to throw in the towel, the ones who said it's too difficult, what did they do? They overcame. They came storming back. And so when we talk about our mission, we know what our mission is. Our mission is is helping people connect, and we do this in 3 ways. We help people connect to a loving God. We help people connect to other people, and we help people connect to an abundant life. And it's so funny. Even before we became Connect Church, and we were Brookfield Avenue Wesleyan Church on the other side of town, we had this in our DNA. And I remember in 2003, the summer of 2003, I was just praying. I'm like, God, what is it that you want us to be? And a couple years earlier, we went as a church, and we were talking about, what's our slogan? What sets us apart? What makes us unique? And so we went together at church. I said, man, what makes us unique? And we gathered together as a group of leaders. And every Wednesday night, back in those days, we had a Bible study every Wednesday night. And we'd gather together. And I said, guys, what makes us unique? What do we want to be known as? And they all said, I wasn't a huge fan of it. And I don't think there was anything wrong with it. But it wasn't something that spoke to me and said, man, I want to go to that church. But this is what they said. This is our moniker at that point. We're the friendly church on the corner. And so we got coffee mugs made up, and we'd give it out to new people when they came, and they'd give it to them, the friendly church on the corner. We'd fill it with chocolate, and it was great. But I had this longing, I had this desire inside of me that God wanted us to be more than just a friendly church on the corner. There had to be a bigger calling. There had to be a bolder calling. On one of the Wesleyan pastors' pages I'm part of, somebody asked the question, how do you define, when somebody asks you what's a Wesleyan, how do you define it? And people put in there, they went back to our roots and said, oh, we're kind of like this, only a little bit different. Someone said that we are I'm not even sure what this term means, we are a spicy Methodist. I'm like, what's a spicy Methodist? I mean, do we just sit around and eat jalapenos? I mean, what is that? And so I didn't enter into that discussion and make fun of the guy because that would have been rude and wrong, and we don't want to be a part of that. But another friend of mine texted me, and he goes, what is a spicy Wesleyan? I'm like, I'm so glad you asked. I have no clue. I go, but what they don't understand, and we talk about this, in our heritage of a church, we broke off from the United Methodist Church in 1840, and the big thing that they talk about, that we talk about publicly, is that it was over the issue of slavery, and it was. But that was one of two issues. The other issue is we had too many preachers who were trying to fit into mainline denominational thought, and they'd stop preaching about entire sanctification. So we weren't telling people that once you're saved, there's more to get out of life than just being saved. And so that's the entire crux of what we talk about. That's what we're here for, and God calls us. He doesn't just want us to sit here and be satisfied with where we are, but there's a longing, there's a desire, there's a pulling in which he says there's more out there than this. When you read through the Old Testament and you see some of these giants of faith, when you read through Hebrews chapter 11, the Hall of Faith chapter in the Bible, all of them had this angst within them that says, God has called me for more than what I see. Even when God called the Apostle Paul, remember what he said to him? He goes, Paul, why do you kick against the goads? I mean, I was probably 8 or 9 when I first read that, and I had no idea what goads were. And at that point, I lived in a farming community. I'm like, hey, what's a goad? Does anyone know what a goat is? Not a goat. I know what goats are. Yeah, a goad is where you prod them, right? To get them to go in the right direction. And so you would have these animals, and you're trying to get them to go in the right direction, so you're prodding them. I really learned about this back in 1990. My friends, their family owned a huge ranch up in Montana, and they said, hey, Mark, you want to come out and spend the night, and we'll go branding and do all these cool things? And so I'm like, yeah, I've never done that before. And they're like, you've never been branding before? Like, no, I've never done that. And so they have this chute thing, and they're forcing the calves down the chute thing, and then they come out, you grab them, you put them on the ground, you put your knee on top of their neck, and you hold them there, and then the guy comes over, and he sticks them, and he brands them. And then if you're really lucky, and you feel on top of his head, if it's a bull or if it's a male calf, then they have to stick this thing to brand their horns so they don't grow horns. And which is really a fun treat. Probably didn't know this. Did you know, and I'm not going to use the term they use because it was kind of not church-appropriate term to use, but do you know that on your first time that you go branding, that they all expect you to indulge in Rocky Mountain oysters? Yeah, I did not. I can honestly say, for those of you who are watching at home, I have never eaten Rocky Mountain oysters, ever. They might be. I've heard that they're a little bit chewy. Just what I've heard. And so, but that was where I firsthand saw the goading, as they would go down these chutes and they would force them in the right direction. They would poke them and they would get running because they didn't want to be poked. But what he's saying to Paul is, you're actually fighting against this. He's saying, Paul, you know that there is something calling you. You know that there is a desire, a passion that God is speaking to you, and you are fighting against it. Have you ever in your life had that fighting sense that you were fighting against what God was calling you to do? And that's where we come. What makes us unique? One of the things that makes us unique is every person that comes into this building matters. And so when they're gone, they get a personal follow-up from Terry K. Bush. And so she says, hey, I missed you. So on Sunday afternoons, we'll be in the car. And it's funny, because we're at football games. I'll be sitting there at the football game, and she'll be doing it on her phone, but she doesn't actually text it in. She actually speaks the text. And so I hear her saying, hey, just want to let you know we missed your smiling face today. It was so, we always miss you when you're gone. And I'm like, oh, thanks, Terry. She goes, I'm talking to Sarah Payne. Like, oh, okay, I'm sorry. Not that she has to say that a lot, Sarah Payne, but that's the most recent one when I told her that I appreciate her telling me that she missed me. But what else makes us unique is that every person matters to us. And I've shared this numerous times because I want it to be important, and I always wanted to be part of our DNA, that when people walk into the Connect Church, they don't have to look around and say, is somebody going to talk to me? That they don't have to look around and say, man, is there a clique that I can get involved in? Is there a group that I can get involved in? Will anybody let me into their group? And again, this comes from people that are includers, and I've never been one of those people that I go to a place and like, man, I don't feel like I belong. But there are other people that say, Mark, this is really important because when people come in, they need to immediately feel that connection. So we work at that. Not like saying, hey, you will connect with people. I don't go around with a cattle prod and prod people and say, talk to somebody. But what do? We live it by example. And now we have better signage up. But do you know what the hardest room in the church to find is? The men's restroom. I was doing a funeral in here one time and saw a guy walking down the stairs to the basement. I'm like, what's he doing? Because someone from Trout who was doing the funeral said, yeah, it's down that hallway, first door on your left. And I go to the truck, I go, no, second door on your left. First door on your left, scary basement. Second door on your left, they can do whatever they want to. And I mean, not whatever they want to, but they can go to the restroom in there. But what makes us unique is that, one, people are important. And so, we don't want to burn people out. But two, we want to be a place where people can get involved, and they can use their spiritual gifts, and they can be used by God. You know what else makes us unique? And I'm not saying this is a negative about any other church in town, but this is something that makes us unique. We believe that prayer makes a difference. So the Honorable Dr. Mark Weeder was here at church on Sunday and preached and just did a phenomenal job. And afterwards, talking to him, and he said, man, he goes, I thought it was great how many people just would come to the altar and start praying. And I said, well, prayer makes a difference. And he laughed. He goes, I know that. He goes, but you don't see that. When people are going through stuff, they're asking for prayer. I mean, these are things that make us unique, that set us apart. There's got to be a uniqueness about us because there's like 75 other churches in town. Here's the other thing. I was talking with Dr. Devin Smith, and a couple weeks ago we were in Enid together, and we're just talking about church and life. And I go, I said I appreciate it because when people come to church, and maybe they've been watching online and kind of getting a feel of what we're about, and they come in and they say things to me like, man, your online videos are really good. Your church services online, everything is great. And I'm like, man, that's great. And so I'll watch other churches, and I'm amazed at the number of churches that look like they're filming a hostage video. And I'm like, not really sure that's the look you want to go for. And I get it. We were gifted. We were blessed. People stepped up and they gave extra money to help us buy video stuff. The district stepped in, gave us a grant to help us buy video stuff. And we have been very blessed by it, and God has done great things. Here's what I want us to know. When you talk what's unique about us, you also have to talk about what's the opposite of unique? What is normal about us? What's ordinary about us is it's easy for us to fall into a malaise, to become content. And contentment, I tell you, is the enemy of great. When you become content with how you're doing stuff, spiritually, it bleeds over in everything in your life. But think about all the things in life up to this point where you were content with. When I was in college, I was content with C's and B's. And so therefore, I wasn't going to work for anything more than a C or a B. If I got a B, I was like, hot dog! I remember my mom, of Terry's and my parents, my mom is the smartest one of all four of them. She's just on another level. She had her nursing degree, and she's working for her BSN. And so she actually got her BSN the same year that I got my bachelor's degree. And so she called me on the phone. She's so excited. She goes, hey, guess what? I'm graduating magna cum laude. What are you graduating? I'm graduating, thank the Lord, and you leave me alone, Mom. Told her nobody likes a braggart. But we become content with a certain level. And when we're content with that, we don't push ourselves any higher. We're like, that's good enough. Example. The difference between Terry and I cleaning the house, Terry cleaning the house and me cleaning the house. Dude, it's not even close. Terry's got a lot of work to do to catch up with me. Actually, a lot of work not to do to catch up with me. I'm like, that's good enough. The boys know when they're doing chores, they don't ask Terry if it's done well. They come to me. And I always say the same thing. Hey, it's good enough. And Terry's like, it's not good enough. It's not. It's not. It isn't. But we fall in. When we become content, and it's easy to do. I remember the moment at Connect Church where we became content. And it took some things that shake up and say, you know what, we shouldn't be content like this. We developed a game plan. When I was doing Epic, we had a blowout year in Epic and growth. And so I had a formula, A plus B equals C. And so I did not change the formula for 12 years. Used this exact same formula because it worked. And there was nothing at all that was telling me it's not working. It wasn't like our numbers suddenly crashed. It wasn't like we had a bunch of problems. But I remember one time, I had a senior who said, wow, we do the same thing now that we did when I was a sixth grader. And I'm like, well, you just go on home. No, I didn't say that. But it was true. Sometimes in the church, we can fall prey to contentment. I'll give you an example of what we're doing to just improve some little things. And there's some things I can't tell you about that are on the horizon that we're working through with the board, and I can't wait to share those things. But over the course of within 20 days, our website will be completely overhauled and updated, and it will be really cool. And so you'll go on the website, and it will be sharp, and it will be modern. We had the same website design for 7 years. And so I talked with a guy from the people that host it, and I said, man, we really need to update this. And he goes, here's what we need to do. And he said, let's get to work on it. Because, it's easy to look at it and say, well, it's good enough. It's getting the job done. But it came down to questions that we would have. Ashley and I would talk about this. Kenneth and I would talk about this. And is it really good enough? And that's just the thing about website. But we're talking about other things is, are we really stretching? Are we really pushing? Are we really ready to get to the next level? It takes sacrifice. It takes work. I've got this chart up behind me of 3 circles. They're going to pop up there. Thank you. Isn't Wendy amazing? Look at that. She's sitting over there. She's controlling it back there. It is awesome. So we have these three circles. I've used this before, so it's nothing new. If you're looking at this thing, I remember that. You probably do. I've used these before, but I just want to throw them out to you again. But you have the three circles. You have churches that are subtracting, you have churches that are adding, and then you have churches that are creating movements. And John Wesley was a movement because when he led someone to Christ, he put them in a discipleship program, a discipleship group, and usually within 3 to 5 years, they were released to be a lay pastor. In fact, he thought it was the greatest thing to release people out to teach small groups and to lead these small groups, to lead people to Christ. And he didn't see anything wrong with that. The church that he came out of thought that was criminal and said, well, no. You see, only the people who wear the robes can teach. And what do you mean by the robes? Only the clergy. He said, now, if we're wanting to build something, we're wanting to multiply something, we're wanting to create a movement, then we've got to develop people who are going to be out there. I just realized that I've got the same thing up there twice. In the inner side and the outside. Anybody else see that besides me? Okay, just wanted to make sure we were tracking the same thing. And so, I asked this question, where are we? And, as a church, we're growing, but we're kind of like adding right now. And there's nothing sinful about about adding. But Jesus Christ called us to be multipliers. And so we're always looking, how can we get to the next level? I would honestly say right now that I feel like we're a 3 out of 5, which again isn't bad. It's where we are, but we always want to be getting better. We want to remove that contentment from where we are. Here's another chart I'm going to throw up there. This one, I promise I have on there once. But this talks about church health. And so you've got -10. Those are toxic churches. When you walk in there, basically you're waiting for the fight to happen. There's something wrong. It doesn't take you long to realize that something's wrong in that church. It's toxic. And then you move from toxic to very unhealthy. These are churches that because of their nature, they're in decline. There's some churches that are declining, and it's not because they're unhealthy. It's because they're in areas that are declining population-wise, and so they're declining, or they're in a transitional area, and it's declining that way. But these churches right here, from -10 to 0, they just aren't healthy. They aren't doing what God has called them to do. And God has put a call on our life, and he says, the first thing that he's put a call on our life for is that we are to love like God loves. And so the church should be a loving place. And being a loving place, we invite people to come into the 4 walls, or in this case, the 12 walls of our church. And inside these 12 walls, we show them love. Now, love doesn't mean that we allow them to do whatever they want to do. My good friend Everett Piper says this: love is so much stronger than tolerate. Because I'll prove it this way. He says, for Valentine's Day this year, I want you to get your wife a card that says, I tolerate you. I mean, I get that from Terry. She's like, oh, Mark, wow, my heart is just beating on my chest. I can't believe you really tolerate me. But that's what we're taught. We're taught to tolerate, right? Everything out there in the world is telling us to tolerate. And Jesus came into that and he goes, hey, guys, I know that you've been taught to tolerate, but I'm giving you a higher command, and that's to love. And so I love my sons, and because growing up loving my sons, when they were going to do something that would hurt them, I didn't pull up a bowl of popcorn and say, man, this is going to be interesting. I want to watch this. I said, don't do that. And they said, well, it's my life. I want to do what I want to do. I'm like, trust me. Let me explain why you don't put your hand on the hot stove. Let me explain why you don't just go and punch somebody out just for no reason at all. Let me explain what that looks like and why we don't react this way. See, love is so much stronger than tolerate. So God has called us. The first step in being a healthy church is we've got to love people. And by love people, we don't say, hey, whatever you're doing is fine. We say, hey, I love you, and we're going to walk this journey with you. We have a couple of AA groups that meet at our church, and sometimes they, in some instances, AA does a better job of accountability than the church does. Because you have to admit you have a problem. And so many times we come into the church, we don't want anybody to admit that they're living in sin or they have problems. And so love, hey, you know what? I've been in churches that they love to tell people they were sinners, and it didn't make them healthy. It just made them mean. Because it was like they gleefully were saying, oh, you're going to hell. And they'd smile about it. When I think of people going to hell, there's no smiling about it. When I think that 4 young men in K County got arrested today, there's no joy in that. I mean, yeah, I'm glad that the school system, the police department protected my kids. But I also know that there are parents right now who are at a police station and they're broken. And they're wanting to know what happened. When you and I sin, God doesn't take delight in that. He's that broken parent who shows up at the police station going, what went wrong? Toxic churches, they've got a lot wrong with them. And they don't care that people are dying and going to hell. They've got their own stuff that they're worried about. I could tell you stories of toxic churches and what it looks like and what it feels like and what that creates. There are people throughout the entire world who will never go to church again because of experiencing a toxic church. But you move out of that toxic, that very unhealthy, and you go to healthy, and you're at a zero, and what does that look like? And you're like, hey, cool, we love each other. And we love each other so much, we have 12 potlucks a year. Because eating together is so amazing. But here's what Carl Vader says. The church doesn't exist merely to do no harm or be a safe place for hurting people. We have been given a mission, and we need to take it seriously. Don't mistake the absence of conflict for the presence of God. Just because there's not conflict going on doesn't mean that God is moving and God is active. There's a lot of churches out there that nothing is going on in, and God's not invited there, and the devil doesn't care about him either. We've noticed, and Terry will talk about this, and sometimes I tell her to quit telling people this, but whenever someone steps in the leadership of the church, Terry goes up to him and says, hey, I just want you to know you're going to come and attack this year. I'm like, Terry, stop telling people that. She's like, well, I want them to know. The devil's coming after you. And it's true. If you want to know, next slide, I got to show you where I feel we are as a church. I think we're probably about a 4 on this scale. Personally, I don't think there's any church in the world that's a 10. I think if you hit 10 status, then you immediately get drawn up to heaven. But I feel that Connect, I feel like we're a 4, maybe a 3, where we're doing some of the right things. And when you look at this, and I think this is kind of what Jesus would say to us. Revelation chapter 2, verses 18 and 19. These are the words of the Son of God, whose eyes are blazing fire, and whose feet are like burnished bronze. I know your deeds, your love, your faith, your service, your perseverance, that you're now doing more than you did at first. What he's saying is, I know that you're now adding to your number. You're doing more good now than you were at first. You're persevering. And that is a very good thing to be said, isn't it? I know that you're making progress. Our goal isn't a 4. Our goal isn't to merely say, hey, I know the numbers, to say we averaged this number last year. So before COVID, we were a church of 117. COVID happened, rails fell off, all the stuff. And so we're working our way back up, and we're much further along than people think we should. I get frustrated because not as far along as I'd like to see us. I'd like to see us back up at 117. But it'd be okay to say you're growing. So last year we averaged 88. This year, if we could average 90, we're adding, we're growing. But God doesn't just want us to add a little here and there. God's design for Connect Church is to usher in a revival and an awakening to Ponca City. He doesn't want us just to merely exist. Here's the question that keeps me up at night. If Connect Church were to suddenly disappear from Ponca City, would anybody know it's gone? Or how long would it take them to realize it's gone? I go to Little League football games. I go because Lance football, not because I just like hanging out at Little League football games. There are like 3 or 4 kids that are in our neighborhood that would ride their bikes back by Vacation Bible School. And we had some of our people said, hey, come and join us. Shane went out and grabbed some kids and pulled them in. And Justin grabbed some kids and pulled them in. And Chad went out and grabbed some kids and pulled them in. And Tana went and grabbed a bunch of snacks and treats and started feeding kids out on the street. And it's funny, every day when they see me outside the church, like, hey, are we having church today? I'm like, no, on Sunday. I tell them we're having church on Sunday 5 days a week, and they haven't shown up on Sunday yet. But I feel that they will at some point realize, show up on Sunday, and you'll find church. But these kids, the whole group of them, they had this big, huge tryout thing for Little League football, and they were all there, and they're like, hey, Mom, there's this guy that goes to this church over close to us, and I want you to meet him real quick. I just want you to know, their parents were completely unimpressed with me. Because they're all looking at me like, okay, cool. The kids are like, hey, we like what you're doing there. Our job isn't, and it takes a little bit to get going. We're like a steam engine. Did you realize that if you put a 1-inch block in front of the tires of the steam engine, when it stops, it'll never get moving? But once the steam engine is fully moving, you can put an 8-inch thick cinder block wall in front of it, and it will blow right through it like butter. Isn't that pretty cool? And so God's saying, I want you to create momentum. Our goal isn't necessarily just to add a little here and a little there. Our goal also is this. We have ministries and people getting involved, and great things happen. And I get excited. I was bragging on Kenneth this week because since he's been leading youth ministry, he has a larger team helping him out with youth ministry than I ever had when I did youth ministry. And I think it's great. And so we're talking about different things and different aspects. And so in children's church, there's a need to split off. Right now we have a one-room schoolhouse, and we're like, man, we need something for the younger kids and some of the older kids to keep them totally engaged so they know that stuff is going on. And so all these great things, and Kenneth and I have talked about the explosion and what to expect in youth ministry and how things are going to change and what this is going to look like in the future. And I said, Kenneth, at some point, you're going to be teaching twice on Sunday night. You're going to have a junior high lesson and a senior high lesson. You guys will come together and do some fun stuff in the middle, but you're going to split them off. 1, because it's so large, and 2, you're going to want to hit different people at different levels of life. And I said, I just want you to know. So, Ashley, when I talk about my job is to protect Kenneth, I'm protecting Kenneth because I want to use him up later in life. Kenneth's out there listening. He goes, what? You're just going to use me? Yes, Kenneth, I am going to use you. But these are exciting things. This is what God has called us to do, not just necessarily add one by one, but God's called us to create a movement. A movement. When I think of a great compliment in the Bible, probably the strongest church that Jesus talked to in Revelation In Revelation 2, verses 9 and 10, it says, I know your afflictions and your poverty, yet you are rich. I know that it may seem like everything's going on, and it may feel like you're poor, but spiritually you're rich. That's what God's calling us to do. God is calling us. So I want to close this evening by talking about 5 shifts in our thinking. 5 shifts in our thinking that will help us. Me as a pastor, you as co-laborers with me, that will help us. We have to move from consumer to contributor. You know, Dr. Weeder said on Sunday, you can't just be a pew sitter. But that unction to get involved, and that somebody came up to me and said, man, I don't want to be a pew sitter. I want to get involved. How can I get involved? We've got to move from being a consumer, what can I get out of church, to what can I contribute to church? What can I get out of it and what can I give to it? We got to move from soloist to conductor. And I use this. So Michael Jordan is the all-time greatest basketball player ever, no arguments allowed. If he was so great, why did it take him so long to win an NBA championship? He didn't have a team around him. I remember watching him in '86 play the Boston Celtics, and he scored 69 points and lost. I mean, it was the Chicago Michael Jordan. There's nobody else on the team. It was just Michael Jordan. But then they started putting the pieces around him. And even when he had all the pieces, they still lost 2 years in a row to the Detroit Pistons. So we have to move from a soloist mentality to conductor, knowing that there are lots of people that are working with us. And it's tough to get out of that. And it's tough because then we're relying on other people to do their jobs, to carry the load. And so when there's just one person involved, you're only relying on yourself, and it's so easy. But we've got to move from being a soloist to being a conductor. We have to move from the perks to the price of ministry. So many times people say, man, there's perks of being involved in leadership. Do I get a special parking spot? Do I get this? Do I get this? And I tell them, there's no perks involved at all. There's actually a greater price to be paid. But everybody wants to sign up for the perks. How do I get the special treatment? How do I get this? How do I get this? I want to be known. I want this. I want that. And there's a lot of people out there. But we've got to move from saying, what is the price I'm going to pay? What are the sacrifices I'm going to make? I've shared this with Jack that if I were to go back and redo high school again, I would make more sacrifices in a lot of different areas than I did. I mean, I enjoyed high school. I had a lot of fun, but I'm like, man, I could have done so much more. I could have made more sacrifices. I could have given to myself more. And so those are the lessons I give Jack. Jack says he's looking forward to Oklahoma Western University and going to college there and everything. And I tell him, I said, hey, I go, have fun, but do well and finish quickly. There's a price to be paid. Are we willing to put in the work? If you want to grow close to God, the work is reading your Bible. The work is praying. The work is getting to church and doing those things and feeding yourself. The next shift that we need to make is from directing to connecting. So it's easy to say, hey, you do this, and you do this, and you do this. But what we need to do is connect people to the mission of, hey, this is where we're going. It's easy to tell people what to do. It's another thing to connect to a ministry. And so I'm fortunate that there are a lot of people around me who have a great skill set and great knowledge. So all I have to do is say, hey, we need this or we need that. And they're like, hey, it's done. Don't worry about it. But when we invite more people to join our teams, then we go from saying, you must do it this way, to just connecting them in and say, hey, freedom. Have at it. The final shift goes from me training people to lead to me training people to transform other leaders. And that's where I come down to, and you say, well, Mark, how are you doing on all 5 of these shifts that you're talking about? Some of them I look at, I'm like, man, whoo, I'm knocking that one out of the park. There's others I'm like, yeah, I'm going backwards. This is the one that's going to take the most work out of me, where I'm saying, I want to transform people. When I look out at our church body and there are people who are saying, man, what does this look like? I want us to get to a point to where we're so organic about growth that we don't even think about it. And when I say growth, I don't want us to set a goal and say, hey, we're going to be 200 by this number or 250 by this number. When I say growth, I want us to grow so much spiritually that as an outpouring of that, we want to see people come to faith in Jesus. And that's what God is calling us to do. I tell you, I feel that I do good on number 3. I willingly traded in perks for a price. I do good on number 1. I don't think I've done a great job of training other people. Hey, don't be a consumer, be a contributor. Because even tonight, crazy night at the house, boys got home from school. I was making supper. Terry's out of town. And I was moving. And I looked over, and Lance is sprawled out on a couch with an ice pack on his knee. And so I said, hey, you need to do something. You can't just sit there. And he goes, well, I got homework to do. And I said, well, do your homework. And that's Lance. But sometimes it happens at church where I'm like, well, I know how to do this, I know how to do this, I know how to do this. And I've got people come around me saying, I know you know how to do this, but should you be doing this? And I'm like, some things I'm like, well, I enjoy doing this. And other things I'm like, yeah, you're right. I probably shouldn't do everything under the sun. But as we look at these shifts and our desire for Amplify is we invite and more people, we want more and more people coming to the room, and we want more and more, not just me talking, but we want conversations where we're developing people, where we're developing a movement, because God's not called us to sit back. God's called us to get involved. God's called us to make sacrifices. And I think so many times I've been unwilling to ask people to make sacrifices that I've cheated them out of the blessing of the sacrifice. So I'm gonna close in prayer tonight, and then we'll go offline. Thank you guys so much for joining us online. Thank you for being here in person. Dear God, I just pray right now for our city, God. We've had a crazy day. Lord, I pray for these young men. I just ask, God, that you would speak to them. I pray, God, that they would hear you right now. I pray for their families who are hurting, who are at a loss for words right now, God. And I just pray, Lord, that you would just, in a mighty way, open up doors of opportunity, open up the church to minister and witness to them, God. I pray right now that you be the Connect Church. Help us, God, to be a church that's focusing on the movement of God, that's focusing on what you want to do, God, not what we want. We just pray this in your holy name. Amen. Hey, Connectors, have a